Hi, I'm Ailith. My sister stole my inheritance after I moved it into a private trust, and then she called me ungrateful at our dad's funeral. But it wasn't just about money. It was about erasing me, slowly, deliberately, from our family's story. They took my name off legal papers, deleted my photo from memorials, rewrote the past like I never mattered. And somehow, I was the villain. Have you ever looked around your own family and realized they were building a life that didn't include you? Let me tell you how it happened. My name is Ailith, and I've lived most of my adult life avoiding conflict. It's easier that way, especially in a town like Rockport, Maine, where people still believe in potlucks, church pews, and not airing dirty laundry. But grief has a way of peeling off the nice parts of people, and when my father passed, it didn't take long for everything underneath to show. At first, it was just tension, subtle. My sister Valora had always been the loud one, the shining one, the firstborn everyone looked to when a decision needed making. So when Dad's health declined, nobody questioned her stepping up. She insisted she'd handle everything. I remember her exact words. "You just focus on grieving, okay?" I wanted to believe her. Maybe I needed to. But small things started to chip at that comfort. Bills I never saw. Calls she took in whispers. Paperwork I didn't remember signing. I tried to ask her once, casually, over tea at her house. "Have you spoken to Dad's estate planner yet?" She didn't even flinch, just said, "I've got it under control, Allie," and changed the subject. I let it go. I wish I hadn't. Dad hadn't been gone 2 weeks when I made the move. My gut wouldn't settle, so I reached out to someone Dad had once worked with, a man named Jeremy Green. Quiet guy. Firm handshake. He helped me create a trust account and moved my share of the known liquid assets into it. It wasn't everything, just what was under my name. I didn't tell Valora. I didn't tell anyone. A few days later, I found out why that was the right call. We were at the kitchen table planning the memorial. Valora had her laptop open, rattling off caterers and flower arrangements. I offered to cover part of the cost, just to share the burden. "Already paid," she said. "Use the joint account." My stomach tightened. I hadn't logged into that account in days. That night, I did. It was empty. Transaction logs showed withdrawals, consistent, organized, like someone preparing for something big. And they started before Dad had even passed. She moved it all. Thousands. No notice, no heads up. Just gone. I didn't scream. I didn't confront her. I just sat there in the dark, fingers frozen over the trackpad. I felt stupid for not seeing it sooner, but also relieved. My instincts had kicked in just in time. Still, I couldn't shake the ache in my chest. Had she always seen me as this dispensable? I spent the next day replaying every family gathering, every childhood slight. The way she'd bossed me around as a kid, the way Mom always said, "Valora means well, she's just under pressure." I started wondering if I'd spent my life mistaking manipulation for management. Was I too soft? Was I raised to be invisible? And then came the call. I was folding napkins at the kitchen counter when the funeral coordinator rang. "Hi, Miss Thorne. We're finalizing the contributor list for the program. We've got your sister listed, of course, and the Thompson cousins. But we didn't see your name on the contribution record. Did you want to be included?" I blinked. "I sent money. I wired my part last Friday." He paused. "Oh. Well, it wasn't labeled under your name. Let me double check." I ended the call before he could. My name. My name was missing. My contribution erased. This wasn't just about bank accounts anymore. This was about being cut out piece by piece. Not with force, but with quiet deletions. Subtle omissions. Erasure masked as taking care of things. And just like that, I knew it's already starting. It was one of those mornings where the fog rolls off the ocean like a slow wave, brushing everything in soft gray. I parked 2 streets away from the chapel, not because there wasn't parking, but because I needed the walk. Space. A few moments to steady myself before stepping into a room that was supposed to feel sacred. The town had already started gathering. Familiar faces from church, old neighbors, even my high school history teacher. But something was off. People I knew, people who'd hugged me at grocery store checkouts when Dad got sick, barely made eye contact. Some nodded. Most didn't. One woman even looked away like I'd done something unspeakable. Inside, the entryway smelled like lilies and lemon furniture polish. I followed the murmurs and made my way to the hallway where the donation board stood, just to the right of the guest book. My fingers froze midair as I scanned the list. My name wasn't there. I blinked, looked again. The in-loving contribution section had Valora's name printed in bold type, alongside a long list of relatives and friends. No mention of me, not even a typo. The funeral coordinator passed by, clipboard in hand. I gently flagged him down. "Excuse me? I made a contribution last week. I wired money for the service. I don't see my name?" He paused, flipped a page. Valora handled all the names. She didn't mention anything else. Of course she didn't. I muttered a thank you and stepped aside. My hands trembled. This wasn't a mistake. It was a message, quiet and calculated. And it wasn't just the board. This whole day felt curated to phase me out. When I walked toward the main chapel, one of the ushers gave me a polite but confused smile. "Miss Thorne? Sorry, the family pews are full. We've got some seats just over here." He gestured to the far side. I didn't argue. I followed him, sat next to a second cousin I hadn't seen in a decade, and stared across the aisle at the rows where Valora sat, flanked by Mom, our uncles, her daughter, and a small sea of supporters. I wasn't just off the board. I was off the stage. The organ began. Valora dabbed her eyes delicately, passed a tissue to Mom. Nobody looked back. As the service unfolded, my mind wandered through years of memories. Dad brushing sawdust off his jeans, his laugh echoing off the dock, the way he always called me Scout. He would have hated this. Not the flowers or the music, but the falseness. The show. The way his goodbye had been turned into someone else's narrative. I didn't cry. I clenched my jaw, forced my shoulders down, and told myself this wasn't about me. It was about him. But it was hard to ignore how every loving story Valora told in her eulogy conveniently skipped me. Dad taught me how to balance a checkbook when I was 10. He was my greatest supporter in launching the studio. He always said I had the backbone of the family. And what was I? The background? The silent understudy? People clapped at the end. Yes, clapped, as if it was a school recital. The chapel began to empty, the air thick with chatter and whispered condolences. I stood in the back, ready to leave quietly, when I felt a tug at my coat. Brielle, Valora's daughter, barely a teenager with her mother's eyes and just enough venom to be dangerous. "Mom said you don't belong here anyway," she whispered. Not angry, not smug, just matter of fact, like she was reading off a list. I didn't flinch. I didn't bend. I only looked her straight in the eye and smiled gently. But inside, something in me snapped into focus. Then I'll make sure they never forget I did. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling while the ocean wind scraped against the windows. Every detail from the funeral cycled through my head on repeat. The looks, the whispers, Brielle's voice like a dagger in velvet. But what gnawed at me most wasn't the child's words. It was the possibility she was simply echoing what she heard at home. By morning, my anger had taken a colder shape. Not fire, but steel. I made a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. Somewhere between clicking through condolences and rereading a half-hearted email from a cousin, I noticed an unopened message from the estate attorney's assistant. "Documents attached for your records." I clicked. My breath stalled. Attached was a PDF of the estate breakdown, a full list of beneficiaries. Valora was listed, of course. So were a few cousins and distant relatives. But I wasn't there. Not a footnote, not a typo, not even a mistaken middle name. I scrolled up, scrolled down. I closed it, reopened it, downloaded a second copy. The result didn't change. My name, erased. I called the office. The receptionist answered politely, asked me to hold. When the assistant finally returned, her voice was cheery and oblivious. "Yes, that's the current finalized list. Is there something wrong with the copy?" I thanked her and hung up. The silence after was so loud it felt physical. It pressed on my chest, rang in my ears. I thought I might scream, but instead I reached for my coat and drove straight to my mother's house. She was in the kitchen, sipping tea, flipping through a photo album like it was any other Tuesday. Her eyes met mine for half a second before she looked back down. "You knew," I said flatly. She didn't pretend not to understand. Just set her cup down and said, "Valora handled everything. That's what your father would have wanted." "No," I snapped. "It's what she wanted. He talked about fairness. You heard him." Seraphine's mouth tightened. "Valora is the eldest. She has always done what needed to be done. Maybe your father was trying to protect you from the burden." There it was, wrapped in a ribbon of soft tones and moral superiority. The script of guilt, polished through decades of subtle invalidation. I left without another word. Back home, I sat at the edge of my bed, phone in hand, scrolling through old voicemails. I stopped at one from 3 years ago. Dad's voice, crackling but warm. "Allie, call me when you can. I want to make sure Valora doesn't bulldoze you out of the family plans. She means well, but you know how she is." I replayed it. Twice. I opened a blank spreadsheet on my computer and labeled the tabs. Transaction records, timeline, witnesses, backup files. Then I opened a fresh Google Doc and started logging everything I remembered. Every comment, every discrepancy, every moment I had shrugged off in the name of keeping peace. It was like rewinding my life through the lens of hindsight. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. Not as the quiet one, not as the easy child, but as the one they thought wouldn't fight. Well, they were wrong. I pulled out a portable hard drive from the back of my closet, where I'd stored old voice memos and recordings Dad had sent me. Back when he was getting forgetful, he'd recorded notes to himself, some of them for us. For me. I played one, shaky and slow, from the spring before he died. "If anything happens to me, don't let her push you out, Allie. That house, it's still half yours. I meant it to be equal, even if I didn't finish the paperwork." I pressed pause and stared at the ceiling. Maybe the paperwork was missing, but the intention wasn't. And I had proof, not legal yet, but real. I sat back down, opened my phone's recorder, and held it close. "Phase 1, document everything," I whispered. "I might have been erased from the paperwork, but I'll write myself back in." After logging everything I could remember, I needed answers from someone who'd been there from the beginning, someone who wasn't carrying Valora's last name or ego. Mr. Dorn had worked with my father for years, handled property matters and trusts. Surely, if anyone knew my father's intentions, beyond what was inked or missing, it was him. His office was tucked behind a dry cleaner on Main Street, same place it had been since the 90s. I hadn't stepped inside in years. The furniture hadn't changed, still smelled like lemon oil and paper. The receptionist gave me a quick, polite smile when I walked in. "I was hoping to speak with Mr. Dorn about my father's estate," I said. She tapped something on her keyboard, then gestured to a seat. "He's just finishing a call." 10 minutes later, I was ushered in. He didn't stand, just looked up from his desk, glasses perched low. "Ailith, I heard about your father. I'm sorry." I nodded. "Thank you. That's partly why I'm here. I received a copy of the estate documents and my name isn't on them." Mr. Dorn closed the file in front of him and folded his hands. "I'm aware." I stared. "But you knew my father. He always said—" He cut me off, firm, but not cruel. "Your sister has retained me as her counsel. I can't speak with you about this." I blinked. "You're representing Valora?" He nodded. "She reached out shortly after your father passed. Brought documentation, previous discussions, and power of attorney notes. Given the conflict of interest, I'm unable to advise or discuss anything further with you." It was the calmest slap I'd ever received. He didn't sound smug. He sounded transactional, as if my erasure had been processed like a form letter. I thanked him, numb, and left the office. The chill hit me as I stepped outside, even though the sun was out. My feet carried me to Aunt Isolde's without thinking. She lived only a few blocks from town square, in the same white bungalow with blue shutters she'd been in since I was a child. She had always been quiet, but kind, the type to bake banana bread when emotions got too loud. She opened the door, startled, but smiled softly. "Allie, come in." We sat in her living room, the ticking of her antique clock the only background sound. "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to be honest, no matter what Valora told you." Her smile faded. You were with Dad 3 days before he died, right? She nodded slowly. Did he mention his will, or how he wanted things handled? Her hands fidgeted in her lap. He said he was working on an update. He wanted it to be fair. He said you had always taken care of him quietly, and that mattered. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Would you be willing to say that to anyone else? To a lawyer? She flinched. I can't. Why not? Her voice dropped. Valora called me. Said if I inserted myself, she'd drag my name through the court for slander. Said it's hearsay unless it's in writing. She sounded serious. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. I'm sorry, Isolde whispered. I just can't get caught in this. I left shortly after, not angry, just tired. Exhausted from every door swinging closed before I could even knock. That night I pulled out old boxes from the attic. Photo albums, receipts, email printouts. I needed more than memories. I needed something Valora couldn't edit or erase. I scoured drawers in the study of the family home, the few rooms Valora hadn't yet locked down. Hours passed. Dust clung to my fingers, the air stale with time. I didn't find a smoking gun, but I did find patterns. Timelines that contradicted what Valora had claimed in the paperwork. Notes Dad scribbled in margins. Loose ends that told a story if someone knew how to read between the lines. The grief I'd once felt was now something sharper. Not rage, strategy. I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to correct a record. Just as I was putting away an old photo album, a yellowed page slipped from between the folds. I picked it up, frowning. The handwriting was familiar. Dad's. Slanted, deliberate. Isolde knows the truth. Just hope she remembers. The note sat on my desk all night. The ink faded just enough to look older than I remembered his handwriting ever being. Isolde knows the truth. Just hope she remembers. I read it again in the morning light, as if the sunrise might reveal a second sentence hiding beneath the paper grain. It didn't. But I finally understood. Dad had been trying to say something. Maybe not with legal clarity, but with the only tools left to a dying man whose time ran out faster than his intentions. It reminded me of something else. A voicemail I had ignored at the time because I was too busy organizing a volunteer drive. I found it quickly. 2 years old. His voice was slower than usual, tinged with breathlessness. Ali, if things ever get messy with Valora, don't let her bulldoze you. You've always been kind, but kind doesn't mean silent. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, blinking back the familiar burn behind my eyes. This wasn't about bank accounts. Not really. It was about being believed, being seen, and somewhere along the way, my sister had rewritten our father's memory as if I had never mattered. That was what made my hands tremble. Not the betrayal, but the erasure. I returned to the photo album where I'd found Dad's note, running my fingers over the cracked leather spine. Beneath the back flap was a pocket I hadn't noticed before. Inside, a small USB drive, the kind he'd used to back up church documents and budget files. I plugged it into my laptop, heart pounding. One folder, labeled Final Wishes. I clicked. There he was, sitting at his desk in the cottage office, wearing the navy cardigan he always reached for when the weather dropped below 50. His eyes looked tired, but focused. The video was dated 5 weeks before he died. If anything happens to me, he began, voice rough but steady, I want everything split evenly. Not just the house or the money, everything. Because I didn't raise one daughter, I raised 2, and it breaks my heart to think either of them would feel less than the other. He paused, exhaled. This isn't a will, I know that, but it's my truth. I love you both. Don't let one voice rewrite the whole story. The video ended there. I didn't cry, I just sat still, hand over my mouth, letting the echo of his words stretch across the room. I played it again, and then once more. This wasn't a legal document, but it was something more powerful. It was a father saying, without conditions, that I was not invisible. I had just been pushed into a corner where my silence served someone else's narrative. That day, I reached out to a woman named Carol, who ran a legal clinic 2 counties over. We'd worked together years ago on a fundraiser for displaced veterans. She wasn't a family friend, which made her perfect. I forwarded her the video. We scheduled a call. During the chat, she confirmed what I suspected. "No, it's not legally binding," she said, "but it's compelling as hell. A good judge will take this into serious consideration, especially if paired with a timeline and inconsistencies in Valora's claims." I spent the next 3 nights building my case. Every date Valora filed something without notifying me. Every receipt I could dig up. Screenshots, emails. I even scanned old journals where Dad had left sticky notes. Piece by piece, the silence unraveled. Valora had tried to bury my father's voice beneath hers, but his love, his clarity, was louder than she anticipated. When I finished organizing everything, I sat down with my laptop, opened my email, and typed a message with no greeting. Subject, watch this. Body. I suggest you watch what Dad left behind before we meet again. The afternoon of the memorial was warm, unseasonably so for coastal Maine. The air felt thick with something I couldn't name. Dread, maybe. Or the weight of what I had decided to carry in silence. Valora greeted every guest at the gate like a politician shaking hands, smiling, hugging, soaking up every murmur of praise. "It's so generous of you to do this," one woman said, touching Valora's shoulder. She nodded modestly, as if it wasn't exactly what she wanted to hear. I stood to the side, near the garden Dad used to weed every Sunday morning. I hadn't said much since arriving. A few relatives offered quick condolences, but most glanced away, unsure of how to place me. That suited me just fine. I wasn't here to explain myself. Not yet. Valora clinked her glass. The backyard crowd hushed. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," she began, stepping onto the small wooden platform near the koi pond. "Dad would have loved this, seeing all of you here remembering him." Her voice trembled just enough to seem human, not rehearsed. "He taught us strength, compassion, and how to take care of what matters." I crossed my arms. The air stilled. "But," she continued, her tone shifting, "some people didn't think showing up during his final weeks was necessary. Some decided their grief should arrive after the paperwork." Murmurs rippled. A few heads turned toward me. "Ungrateful people," she said, meeting my gaze for the first time in weeks, "sometimes make the most noise when they think they've been left out." I didn't blink. She looked away first. For a few seconds, I debated walking out. I could feel the blood climbing my neck, my hands clenching inside my sleeves. But then Dad's voice echoed in my memory. His video, his letter, his voicemail. "Don't let her bulldoze you." I stepped forward. "Valora," I said, just loud enough to cut through the silence. "If you're finished, I'd like to say a few words." The crowd parted slightly as I walked toward the center. Valora froze but didn't stop me. "I wasn't going to speak today," I began, scanning the guests. "But since there's been so much said about presence and absence, I'd like to clarify mine." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. For those wondering why I've been quiet, it's because I've been collecting truth. Not gossip, not assumption, truth. And my father's last words, his real ones, are coming soon to each of you. I turned and walked away, the air behind me electric. On my way back to the house, Brielle passed by, eyes full of her mother's fire. "Guess you finally got the attention you always wanted," she muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. I stopped, looked at her, but I didn't respond. She wasn't my opponent. Not yet. I went inside, found my phone, and pulled up my contact list. Family group chat, cousins, aunts, even those I hadn't spoken to since college. The message was short. The attachment took longer to upload, but I waited. Subject line: "You deserve to know what Dad really wanted. Body, no body, just the video file." The silence lasted 48 hours. No texts, no emails, not even a cryptic reply from Valora, which, knowing her, was more unsettling than if she had stormed into my driveway and slapped me across the face. Instead, it started with a call from my cousin, Lorraine. "I watched it," she whispered. "The video. I didn't know. I thought—" She paused. "I just didn't know." By noon, 3 more messages had come through. Some were supportive, some were confused, and a few were downright awkward, ending with lines like, "I'm sure there's more to it than what we're seeing." But what they saw wasn't the problem. It was what Valora made sure they saw next. The first blow landed at the community center. There was a photo display for Dad. something Valora had submitted as a healing tribute. A collage of family moments printed and laminated. There, front and center, was our family Christmas photo from 5 years ago. Except my face was gone, cropped cleanly, like I'd never been there. I stared at it for a full minute before asking the volunteer nearby who had put it together. "Oh," she said, eyes scanning the list. Valora submitted the files directly. Everything came from her. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just took a picture of the board and walked away. Not for proof, just as a reminder. When people asked how far Valora was willing to go, I could show them exactly where my head used to be. Then came the whispers. She only came back after Edgar died. She's just bitter she wasn't the favorite. I heard she hadn't spoken to her father in over a year. Facebook posts followed. Cryptic ones, nothing direct, just enough venom to spread through the right veins. Valora never posted anything herself, of course. She had proxies for that. Friends, followers, even a few family members who owed her favors. Someone emailed my workplace, said I was mentally unstable and using family tragedy for personal gain. The HR manager flagged it and forwarded it to me. There was no name attached. I sat at my desk, the cursor blinking on an email draft I couldn't finish, wondering what the point of truth was if no one wanted to hear it. For a moment, just one, I almost gave up. And then I remembered what she said. Don't let her bulldoze you. I stood, grabbed my bag, and drove straight to the cottage. Dad's old office still smelled like pine cleaner and paper. I started at the top drawer, moving methodically. Receipts, church bulletins, index cards with phone numbers written in caps. No smoking gun, but layers. Notes that hinted at projects left unfinished. Printed bank statements, a rough draft of a letter with my name at the top and the words, "To be signed." Then I found the backup drives. 3 of them, all labeled with dates, all dusty. I took them home and plugged them in one by one. Nothing, then more nothing. Until I remembered something from years ago. Isolde's son, Darren, had helped Dad set up cloud backups for emergency use. Dad hated online anything, but Darren had insisted it was smart. I grabbed my phone. The message was short. "Darren, did you ever help Uncle Edgar set up a cloud backup system? I need that password." I stared at the screen a moment, thumb hovering over send. Then I hit it and waited. The notice came by certified mail. Thick envelope, legal header. I opened it in the driveway. Foreclosure proceedings initiated. My name was listed second on the deed. Valora had used Dad's house, the house we grew up in, as collateral for her yoga studio loan. And now that her so-called empire was folding, the bank wanted the land back. Land Dad spent his entire life protecting from developers and chain stores. Land Valora just saw as leverage. I took a walk down the gravel path behind the cottage to the dock, the place Dad used to sit with a cup of coffee and a bag of sunflower seeds. I stood there a while, watching the tide drag thin sheets of seaweed against the rocks, trying to swallow the truth. This wasn't just about lies anymore. This was theft. By the time I got back to the house, I was done waiting. I opened my email and typed without a greeting. "You used our father's home as your own personal bank account. That ends now." I copied the estate attorney, hit send. Valora never replied. The next morning, Darren, Isolde's son, finally texted back. It was a single link. Google Drive, folder name, Edgar Final. My hands were shaking so bad I had to sit down. Inside were scanned receipts, handwritten notes, voicemails, and one video file, time-stamped a month before Dad died. I hit play. The camera was slightly tilted, showing only part of his face, but the voice, his voice, was clear, deliberate. "If anything happens to me, I want my daughters to share what I leave behind, equally. It's not just money, it's my name, and no one owns that but me." He paused as if thinking. "And if anyone tries to say different, they're lying. Don't let the loudest one rewrite the story." I sat back in the chair, closed my eyes, let it wash over me. He had said it, and he'd made sure it was saved. That night, I sent an invitation to every relative Valora had spun her version of events to. Even the passive ones. Even the ones who had stayed silent while she painted me as greedy and estranged. Zoom, 7 p.m. They joined one by one. faces arranged like a checkerboard of awkward guilt and polite curiosity. Valora joined late, muting herself instantly. "I won't speak long," I began. "You've all heard versions of this family's story. I'd like you to hear one more, from the man at the center of it." I played the video. No music, no edits, just Dad. Raw and real and undeniable. When it ended, there was silence. The kind that hangs in the air like smoke after a fire. Aunt June wiped a tear. Cousin Mark shook his head and muttered, "Damn." Valora disconnected from the call. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just sat there staring at the blank square where her face had been. Later that night, after I'd shut everything down and poured a glass of water, I stepped outside to check the mailbox. An envelope was resting there. No stamp. Hand-delivered. Inside was a photograph. Me and Dad, fishing off the dock. I was maybe 12. He was wearing that awful straw hat Mom used to tease him about. We were both laughing, lines tangled, his arm around my shoulder. On the back, in messy pen, "He always knew you were the one who'd protect his legacy." The news spread quietly, like rain soaking into old wood. The estate file was reopened within days of the family call. The attorney, now clearly distancing himself from Valora, issued a brief statement confirming receipt of the video. He didn't need to say much. The timestamp spoke louder than any signature. 3 days later, I received official notice. The estate would be split equally. Dad's video would be accepted as supplemental intent, given the corroborating documents and testimony. There was no hearing, no dramatic courtroom moment, just a quiet email and a digital scan of the judge's ruling. Valora didn't contest. She submitted a withdrawal through her lawyer, citing emotional strain. I didn't feel victorious. I felt released. I walked out of the courthouse alone, a breeze tugging gently at my jacket. The sky above the old town square was a clean stretch of blue. The kind Dad used to say meant a clean break in the weather. A few people reached out. Some called. A few neighbors left notes on my porch. Words like proud, strong, right. I read each one, tucked them in a drawer. Gratitude isn't what I was after, but truth, finally, had a voice. Valora never contacted me. Her studio quietly shut its doors. One morning I heard she'd left town, packed up Brielle, sold what she could, and vanished downstate. No dramatic goodbye, just absence. Then, a week later, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper. The handwriting was unfamiliar. I didn't understand. I do now. It was signed, simply, Brielle. I held the note for a long time, not because it made anything okay, but because it proved something had changed, even if only a little. A month passed. Spring crept in. I visited the house, the one Dad built, the one Valora nearly lost. Now, finally, legally mine. But I didn't go to stake a claim. I went with a sketchpad and a permit application. That house wouldn't be mine to live in. I decided it would be a grief support center. Dad's name on the plaque. A place where people could sit, speak, or say nothing at all. Where silence wouldn't be mistaken for weakness, and the quiet ones wouldn't be forgotten. Renovations began slowly. I met with a carpenter, a counselor, a nonprofit consultant. Every step felt like both a goodbye and a beginning. One evening, I walked down to the shoreline, same place where Dad and I used to cast our lines, never catching much, but always leaving calmer. I stood there, the wind curling around me, eyes on the water. "You were right," I whispered. "The quiet one has to speak up sometimes." I didn't hate Valora. I didn't forgive her either, but I didn't carry her with me anymore. That was the difference. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small smooth stone, initials carved gently across the front, E.T. I knelt at the edge, let the rock slip from my fingers, and watched it vanish into the current. Not as an ending, but as a release. Sometimes, it's not about winning the fight. It's about finally being heard. I used to think keeping peace meant staying quiet, but silence, when twisted by others, becomes permission. And I've learned that protecting someone's memory means standing up, even when your voice shakes. My story isn't just about inheritance or betrayal. It's about reclaiming your worth when others try to write you out. Maybe you've lived through something like this: a sibling's shadow, a parent's silence, a moment you should have spoken but didn't. If so, I hope you know it's never too late to rewrite your part. What about you? Have you ever been erased from your own story? Tell me in the comments below, just type 1 if this resonated with you, or let me know where you're watching from. And if this story didn't land with you, I want to hear that too. What would you have done in my place? If this video touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. You never know, your story might be next.